All right, welcome Year 12s. We're looking here at our second topic. So back to looking at activity analysis in relation to the demands of sport and physical activity. So we've already covered our acute and chronic adaptations to training, and we've looked at our energy system demands of different activities. Now we're going to take a step back and look at how do we actually analyse the demands of the sport or particular physical activity. So the key ideas here: investigating technology and techniques used to analyse and explore physiological demands, and understanding how that information from the analysis of the physiological demands can be used to improve performance. So these are the four steps. So looking at the analysis of the demands of the sport, applying that training principle and method, which we will learn later, look at how that training can be applied or how we can monitor that relative fitness, and then looking at how that creation of chronic adaptations to the aerobic or anaerobic systems can then improve that performance. So here we are. What methods are actually, or devices are used to explore the physiological demands of activity? So there's a number of these methods or devices, and again, it really comes down to the availability of that device, but it's more importantly for us is to sort of understand a couple of them and know what popular ones can actually do. So we're looking here at heart rate monitors, one that we used with our beat test, so we can see the intensity of how we're working in that particular exercise. So depending on that intensity, we can know if say we're looking at the low hundreds beats per minute, it's really a sub-maximal activity, where if we're pushing up past that 75, 85%, we're getting at that maximum level of intensity, pushing up into our anaerobic systems like our lactic acid system and our PC system. We have our GPS here, which is used by a lot of elite clubs, and now that can measure things like distance travelled, speed travelled, and looking at heart rate as well. So that's really good at looking the intensity of the effort of the exercise, but speed is another good identifier of how hard we're working, what type of system that we're working in. So here we're looking at some data. So again, looking to answer the question, what methods and devices are used to explore the physiological demands of activity? So here we're looking at some data that's collected during a semi-professional trial game over two 20-minute halves, or two 20-minute quarters. So it's an example looking at the heart rate beats per minute. So we can assume that it's a heart rate monitor. So technology here has shown how the efforts go from sub-maximal, here, here, and here. We could probably identify here it being the start of the event, and here being the rest periods. So our heart rate is really dropped. We can see here our efforts are spiked from 150 up to sort of mid 180s, 190s up here, where we can assume that the intensity of the effort is a lot higher. Now it shows here how we go up to a really high intensity effort, and then the heart rate drops. So we could probably suggest that there's a rest period there as well. Now, questions. What can be seen in the data? What can be seen in the data is the efforts during the quarters in relation to the games are higher. So we can see here that the player was actually substituted out of the game for a rest at the 12-minute mark of the second quarter. So after this period here. Now let's think about a reason why that player is substituted. Now what has happened during this spike of heart rate? We could assume that maybe they've performed multiple efforts in a row, anaerobic efforts. So if we're looking at anaerobic efforts that are exceeding that 10 seconds, we're looking at significant lactic acid buildup. So we may have got to the point here where the player has suffered some fatigue and needs to have a brief spell to allow the heart rate to drop, to allow the PC to replenish, and to remove some of that lactic acid, so they can get out for that last period of the game and perform at a higher intensity. So answer that they've given us here: the player has just completed a series of sustained high level efforts as seen in the data. The coach would realise that sustained efforts like the depleted PC, build up in lactic acid, promote dehydration and build up in body heat, all factors in the onset of fatigue. So to allow this player time to recover from these efforts, the coach has actually substituted that player and goes back on after 2 minutes. Enough time to these factors to be attended to. More data here. So it's really showing a breakdown between player A and player B and the intensity of exercise that they've performed in this game. So from standing to walking to jogging to sprinting and to striding. So we're looking here also intensity measured by kilometers per hour. So striding being say 14 to 27, sprinting being a bit higher than that, standing not measured because we're not actually moving, walking from 0 to 7.5 kilometers per hour. So the question here asks us to use data from the diagram to explain and identify one effort during the game where player B would require the aerobic energy system to be dominant. So what we don't even need to be able to look at the kilometers per hour. We can identify the intensity just through the action that we know is standing, walking, jogging compared to sprinting and striding. Now I would say we could pull data from any of these three options here. So standing, walking or jogging, where we could say the aerobic system would be dominant. So an answer could say, well, for player A, they had 5 efforts where they were standing. Further analysis would say we had up to 15 efforts where we were walking, where the aerobic would be dominant. See here, answer, any effort where the intensity is submaximal. For example, walking, with 7 to only percentage of the maximal effort in this case is sprinting. The technique is excellent because the evidence to support observation is expressed as a percentage of the maximum in case the above percentage of maximum is easily understood to be submaximal. Again, another question. Using data from the diagram, explain and identify an effort during the game where player A would require anaerobic energy system to be dominant. So again, we just identify here between sprinting, striding, jogging, walking, and standing, what's a high intensity activity. All right, you could probably take something out of that sprinting. Any effort where the intensity is maximal. For example, sprinting is 100% maximal effort, maximal speed 27. So you could say any of the 5 efforts by player A. State and explain another method that could be used to measure the energy systems used during this game. So have a think for a second. What could be used, or what's a method that could be used to measure the energy systems during this game? Could we measure it through heart rate? Could we measure it through the skill that is being performed and the intensity that requires to perform that skill? Could we go through that kilometers per hour? So anything from skills in the game to heart rate to even lactate levels produced during the game. So with it, the tool that we saw at the start, that lactate reader. So if we can see that there's a higher level of lactate produced in that blood at that point, we can say that the intensity is higher and that that anaerobic system would be predominant at that point. So now that we've looked at how to analyse the energy systems in a team game, we need to get out our Essentials Guide booklet or our Essentials Guide textbook and go from pages 77 to pages 83. We need to read and highlight and answer the questions relevant. So pages 77 to 83, read and highlight the text in there, which would relate a lot to the stuff that we've just been talking about then, and answer the relevant questions. Make sure we are completing this, otherwise we are not getting the essential learning.